She splashes water across his shoulders. Crystal beads scatter like a tiny glittering storm. Guests freeze mid-laugh. Phones lift. A sharp female voice cuts through the rooftop noise. Security. Remove him now. This isn't a place for people like you. The words hang, heavy and sudden, and for a moment the skyline and the yacht's polished chrome feel smaller than that single accusation. The man who gets drenched stands still. Water rolls down the collar of his shirt. His palms are open, calm. He blinks, tucks a soaked strand of hair behind his ear, and tilts his wrist almost without looking. A watch flashes at the edge of a napkin of light. A watch that could buy more than half the hors d'oeuvres. The guests see the wet shirt and the quiet man. They see the hostess, red-faced and righteous. They see what they expect to see. This is Manhattan at dusk, a private party pitched against a glassy river and a skyline that knows how to be indifferent. The yacht is a palace with a polished marble deck and every surface whispering wealth. Crystal chandeliers drip low over a terrace where waiters weave like precise punctuation. Someone arranged orchids in low, aggressive bouquets. A countdown clock on a promotional screen quietly ticks toward the evening's headline act. 13 minutes, then 10, then 9. An audible metronome that presses each exchange into urgency. Her name is Emma Rodriguez. She is the hostess, the engine of pretense and order at this event. She has a clipboard, a curated indignation, and practiced authority. She moves like someone trained to make decisions, and to make them loudly. People obey her not because they have to, but because they want to belong to the decision. On nights like this, belonging is currency. Emma spends it liberally. The man she humiliates is Kwame Washington. He came alone like any guest, with no entourage, no announcement. He carries himself with a quiet that looks like confidence, the sort of composure that isn't loud, but isn't fragile either. People sense the difference and mistake silence for passivity. They don't see the ledger of influence most men cannot touch, contracts and projects and payrolls that run quietly out of sight. They see only the shirt and the casual claim on a balcony. They see what they are already primed to see. Phones record everything. Victoria Sterling, a society blogger with a sharp jawline and sharper captions, angles her phone to get the perfect frame. Her live stream flicks to life. Man gets confrontational at the Sterling soiree. Yacht drama. The viewer count like a pulse begins to climb, 2,000, then 3,400. Comments flood in, a chorus of hot takes. This man looks aggressive. Security now. Not here for this. A few viewers type, "Who is he?" And some type, "Good on Emma." The first hand that reaches for security is Emma's. She points, calling out for Derek Walsh, the yacht's manager. Stern, efficient. A man who treats protocol like scripture. He hears his name, looks up from an arrangement of menus, and starts across the deck, radio clipped to his belt. Derek has practiced this choreography of problem-solving, a firm voice, a measured approach, an attempt to diffuse. Tonight his voice will be drowned in a stronger sound, the cultivated moral certainty of someone determined to enforce the space she believes belongs only to certain people. Emma's accusations begin as clipped commands and then sharpen. Her tone draws on a vocabulary of threat, wrapped in social propriety. Insinuations about trespass, about timing, about privilege used carelessly, about a presumptuousness that, in her telling, edges into theft. She speaks publicly where a private word would have sufficed. Her words are performative. She is less interested in truth than in spectacle. "Get his ID," she says loudly. "Now!" She moves as if the act of demanding will itself be the proof of rightness. A guest from the back records with a shaky hand, his giggle hidden behind the camera. Another guest leans forward to crowd the scene. Emma slaps a hand toward Kwame's chest as if to stop him from explaining. She sources her authority not from fact but from the collective momentum building behind her indignation. People who want to see someone disciplined. Kwame remains calm. He lifts his hands in a small, non-threatening gesture and says, "There's no need." But Emma cuts him off, louder and angrier, forcing the conversation into public. When someone shouts from the periphery, "He's an uninvited guest," the crowd's assumptions begin to harden into narrative. An intruder, an interloper, an example. Derek arrives, apron still tucked into his belt, radio squawking soft static. He is trained to check credentials, to confirm reservations, to uphold the rules that keep liability away. He comes with polite authority and a tablet in hand. He asks the standard questions, his voice trying to thread the needle between hospitality and escalation. "Sir, do you have a reservation under your name?" Kwame reaches into his inner pocket and offers a business card. Simple, black print on heavy stock. The camera angles catch the motion. It is an ordinary gesture, meant to de-escalate. It could have been the end of the scene. Emma doesn't let it be. She slaps the card out of his hand with a quick, practiced motion and watches it flutter toward the railing. It arcs, silver against sunset, and lands in the water. Someone gasps. The crowd laughs unevenly. Derek steps between them, arms a fence of professional calm, but the fence is paper-thin tonight under the weight of the moment. On Victoria's stream, the viewer count pops to 7,800. Comments scroll like a running ticker. She was right. He didn't belong here. Some ask for context. A few try to moderate. Wait, slow down. Why did she toss the card? But their voices are quieter, buried beneath the rush. Kwame watches the card sink. He doesn't reach for it. He looks at Emma. He looks at Derek. He looks at the people clutching their phones. There is no posture of indignation in him, only an unhurried assessment. In the silence around him, a close-up of his wrist catches the light. The watch is not ostentatious. It is precise, expensive in a way that suggests taste, not show. It is an emblem they see without understanding its meaning. For many here, the watch is a contradiction. A sign of wealth on a man they have already decided doesn't belong. Their cognitive dissonance doesn't lead them to reassess their assumptions. It leads them to rationalize them. "Are you kidding me?" Emma hisses. "You can't just—" She stamps her foot as if on stage. Her indignation is public and performative, something designed to be validated by the crowd. She asks the security guards for names and threatens to have someone removed if the man doesn't leave. The security guards look to Derek for instructions. Derek hesitates. The standard says, "Confirm identity, document the incident, escort if necessary." But Emma's anger has become a demand, and the demand is louder than procedure. The bystander effect starts to show its face. People look away, some casting glances at the live stream where strangers are cheering and clicking. On Victoria's stream, the viewer count climbs again, 12.4K. A new wave of comments pours in, more decisive this time. "Call security. This guy looks dangerous. I want to see him off." The narrative has consolidated. In the theater of social media, a handful of loud voices recruit an audience, and the audience rewards them with numbers. Numbers feel like proof. Kwame's voice is measured. He says, "I'm a guest. I'd like to be left alone." The words are simple, lacking theatricality. They don't fit the story people want to watch. Emma leans into that gap like a predator sensing an opening. "Sit down," she snaps. "Now." A waiter passes, carrying an armful of champagne flutes, and the man knocks into him by accident. A bubble of champagne arcs into the air and bursts. Someone says the air smells of lemon oil and money. Laughter swells. The hosts around them adjust their collars like people who have been trained to laugh at the right moment. Derek raises his tablet again, trying to be clinical. He searches the reservation list, flicking to the guest manifest and vendor passcodes. He scrolls. His fingers hesitated at the name column. He calls up the guest list, and the search is slow against the life of the party. The feed moves in seconds and the clock continues to count down. Emma paces, panting a little at the edges of her composure. She is a woman on the brink, fueled by a sense of ownership of the event, and a righteous paranoia that anyone outside the expected roster is a threat. "You people don't understand," she says into the air, not just to Kwame. Her voice seeks allies among the guests, among the anonymous commenters. "You think you can walk into someone else's party? Not under my watch." A man in a linen suit records with a steadier hand and posts the clip to his followers. His caption is a sentence of moral clarity. The clip spreads. Another blogger tags the venue. Within minutes, Mr. Uninvited, trends in small spheres of social attention. The hashtag picks up speed, carried by the familiar gusts of outrage that blow through social feeds. The internet doesn't ask for nuance, it asks for spectacle. Quaim never raises his voice. He does not call out Emma or try to shame her back. Instead, he repeats, "Please, I'd like to simply be left alone." There is a dignity in his restraint, but the restraint is not passivity. It is a deliberate refusal to play into a script designed for viral consumption. He reads the momentum and rejects it. He will not let his personal humiliation feed the week's clicks. Emma hears the calm as a provocation. She leans closer, breath hot with the performance of righteousness. "What did you say? You expect us to believe you're some kind of—" Her words split and fall. She searches for a cutting label she can wield. The room waits for language that fits the frame. Invader, thief, liar. The language she seeks is racialized even when unsaid. The room recognizes its outlines and completes its assumptions for her. A guest mutters, "This is what happens when people don't respect boundaries," and the phrase becomes a kind of permission to look away from nuance. The more people look away, the less chance there is that someone will step forward and insist on fact. The live stream swells to 31K viewers. Comments flood. "Remove him now. Security, please. This is insane." At the edge of that cacophony, Derek finally speaks in a voice that tries to restore procedure. "Sir, we need your name and a valid ID," he says, the sentence rehearsed, neutral, the sort of language used to diffuse hundreds of small crises. Derek's hand is already reaching toward the man. He intends to check the guest list and the invitations printed on the system. Kwame nods and reaches again for the leather wallet in his jacket pocket. Derek leans in with a tablet, ready to scan, to match an invitation code, to verify credentials, and put a pause in the momentum built against this one man. For a split second, the solution is within reach. A simple confirmation could stop the social storm. Emma intercepts. She moves with a speed that is almost theatrical. Her hand slaps the wallet closed, pins Kwame's wrist against his chest, and snatches at Derek's tablet. There is a tug. The tablet topples backward. For a moment, time fractures into small, violent bits, plastic and glass, and the dolphin-like squeal of someone dropping a glass. Emma swats the business card out of his hand earlier. Now she shoves Derek's tablet so it teeters and then clatters to the deck, its screen shattering into a web of light. Gasps Jag across the terrace. The tablet screen spiders across like ice. The damage feels deliberate, even if it was impulsive, an act that looks like sabotage in the theater of a crowd already ready to believe the worst. Victoria's feed goes wild. The viewer count spikes to 47K in a blur. Comments stream in red-hot lines. "She threw his card. He's a liar. Anyone see the tablet? Did he try to hack in or something?" The shape of the story slips toward the narrative of guilt, rather than the slower, less flattering story of assumption. Security steps forward, gloved hands reaching for Kwame. Two men encircle him. One grips his shoulders. The other intrudes on his space. The crowd leans in, hungry for closure. Derek is standing back, stunned, the ruined tablet at his feet. He finds a radio on his belt and begins to bark protocol into it, his voice a thin attempt to restore order he no longer controls. "Codes, screen the guest list. Now," he snaps. "Handle this by the book." Emma places herself between Kwame and the deck gang like a general who has already won. Her chest is heaving. She doesn't see the watch now. She sees only the man who almost ruined her narrative. She has built a moral scaffolding that depends on him being guilty. If he is not guilty, if he belongs not to trespass but to the executive class that holds contracts and influence, then the scaffolding will crack. She cannot let that happen. "You're not going anywhere," Emma says, "not until management says so." Derek looks from the spilled tablet to the security team to Emma. For a moment he tries to revive the logic of policy. "We follow protocol," he says. "We cannot have guests causing scenes." "Then remove him," Emma snaps back. "Now." Phones are pointing like judgments. An older woman in a fur stole presses record with trembling hands. The live stream runs a little slower than real time. The chat reads, "This is unbelievable. Can't believe they let him in." The crowd's public opinion ossifies into consensus. an ugly thing when it forms around an incomplete set of facts. Quame's expression does not change, but his fingers curl with a quiet intent against the rail. He breathes in as if to center himself. He has made a career in taking volatile situations and turning them into leverage for dignity. He knows the instruments of power require sometimes the absence of rage and sometimes the presence of unshakable calm. He calculates the risk of being loud and the cost of being silent. Quiet, tonight, is a weapon. He says softly, but with an authority the crowd wasn't expecting. I am not here to cause trouble. I am a guest, and I will not be humiliated. Emma answers with a flurry of small, efficient insults, accusations of entitlement, of presumption, of audacity. They are no longer about facts. They are about who belongs to a social imagination. Guests murmur, some nodding, some hiding blushes. The scene takes on the texture of performance. Someone writes a caption. Someone edits and posts it. The internet watches, judges, and amplifies. Then Kwame reaches into his pocket and taps his phone. He makes a brief call. No one pays it much attention at first. A private gesture drowned in public drama. But that call is the pebble that will crack the calm surface. Derek, still stunned by the shattered tablet, starts to reroute the event's tech team. He calls into the radio for an inventory of the ship's guests and background checks. The radio answers with static, slow, and uncertain. The lights over the terrace dim for a beat, as if acknowledging the pause in human certainty. On the stream, a live comment reads, "Is he on the guest list?" But the answer is delayed. The stream keeps growing. 56K, 71K. The numbers accelerate like contagion. The internet's eyes are hungry, now turned fully onto the yacht, waiting for the next outrage to cement their conviction. Across the deck, a young social manager named Leo, responsible for the night's playlist and the digital atmosphere, is sweating. He keeps refreshing a dashboard that should tell him how many people are on the invitation list. The dashboard is lagging. The screen fills with loading spinners, then an error message. Leo reaches for the main console and tries to reboot. His fingers move with the mechanical efficiency of someone used to solving software problems for a living. He is under pressure, the way the glass is under a storm. On Kwame's call, his voice is low. No one can hear what he says. On camera, his lips move. A sound drops out across the terrace. The speakers that have been feeding ambient music stutter. The DJ's set drops into a weird silence that sounds almost sacred. For a startling 2 beats, there is nothing but the soft slap of water against hull and the small murmurs of a crowd that smells scandal. Emma, spurred by the momentary hush, raises her hand like a conductor calling for a decisive downbeat. "We have a right to safety," she says. Her voice rebounds. People nod. The little moral machine of the party whirs back to life. Then, with the decisiveness of someone who understands the technology of control, Kwame pockets his phone and says, "All right." It is not a surrender. It is an annotation. He reserves his rights and the moment to exercise them. At that same moment, the yacht systems hiccup again. Lights dim. The ornamental fountain at the stern splutters. Video screens flicker. Phones held aloft catch the moment. A cut to black for half a breath. The live stream stutters. On Victoria's feed, the viewer count hits 89K and then hangs, as if the internet itself is holding its breath. No one knows yet whether it is a coincidence, a glitch, a power surge, or whether something else is being coordinated behind corporate doors. But the silence that follows is uncanny. It pushes people to lean in like animals pinned together by an unseen scent. Derek checks a dial and mutters into his radio that he'd lost access to the event's control system. He thumbs the emergency switch. The console is unresponsive. Emma's face hardens. See, she shouts. "This man is trouble." Her finger jabs toward Kwame in a motion meant to direct blame. She wants the crowd to see what she claims to see, the cause of the disruption embodied in the quiet man. Kwame looks over the edge of the deck into the dark water. He watches the sunk business card drift away as if it were a small, private universe. He turns back to the guests and speaks, his voice even, and slow and carrying. "Everyone, please, let's not make this worse." The sentence is simple, but the undercurrent is heavy with meaning. It implies an assessment of the situation beyond the spectacle. There are leverage points available, and humiliation won't be one of them. His composure unsettles the momentum of the crowd. For some, it begins to look less like passivity and more like a presence of command. At the rail, Derek finally finds a connection, an encrypted line he uses for management emergencies. He taps and is connected to the brokerage of the event's owner, a name that appears as an internal reference on his display. He squints at the screen and types a query. The data appears in a rush of technical text. Derek reads the name on his tablet aloud as if the syllables themselves might be an exorcism. Washington Enterprises. Owner, Kwame Washington. A beat of disbelief runs through him like a current. Derek's eyes flick to Kwame. The room is suddenly too small for what Derek knows. The knowledge is a small, sharp thing in his stomach. He glances up at Emma, who is still buoyed by the uproar she manufactured, and he realizes the contradiction out loud, an error in the script they've all been following. The man who is the target of humiliation is the name on the ledger that underwrites this entire night. The reaction is not immediate. Shock moves like cold water through the party. Phones capture Derek's quiet reading aloud and send it into the live stream. On Victoria's feed, somebody types, "Wait, what, he owns the venue," and the text cascades across the chat like a rumor catching wind. The viewer count spins higher. People begin to murmur, this time with a different inflection, curiosity fingered by embarrassment. Emma looks at Derek, then at Kwame, and for the first time she seems to feel the ground tilt under her feet. Her hands go suddenly smaller. Her voice, which had been a drumbeat of certainty, becomes a question. "That's not possible," she says, as if the facts are a misprint. The crowd senses the tremor. Their certainty wavers like a loose chandelier. Social momentum can be both swift to form and swift to crack. Kwame watches Emma undo herself under the weight of discovery. He does not gloat. He understands that the more brutal the public humiliation, the more skill required to convert it into something constructive. He stands where he is, soaked yet steady, and his posture says what his words do not. This can end in ruin or reform. The ship hums with the noise of people catching their breath. Some guests look ashamed, some incredulous, some annoyed that their evening is interrupted. Victoria hangs on the new twist. Her fingers hurry over the keys, rewriting a headline to seize the new narrative. The live stream now bears a new caption. Hostess humiliates guest who might be the owner. Viewers spike towards 6 digits as the twist hits the feeds. Derek, trying to be practical, moves to make a phone call. He needs confirmation. He knows the risk. If he calls the wrong person or makes a mistaken announcement, legal and financial consequences may follow. This is where policy meets panic. The tablet lies shattered at his feet like a metaphor. He searches, then connects to a corporate app that reads ownership records. The screen blinks with logos, contracts, and names. It registers meaningful data, contracts under negotiation, sponsorships tied to the event, payments pending for the crew. His stomach tightens. Emma's face has gone pale in the way people go pale when they imagine their career, a carefully sculpted thing, sliding into the gutter. She opens her mouth to speak, to claw back control, but the words are thin. The initial joy of being on a stage has been replaced by a cold awareness of the consequences that might follow. On the perimeter, a few guests mutter about lawsuits, about layoffs that could ripple like a contagion into their own friend groups. The word contract flits through the crowd like a ghost. Someone remembers a billboard ad with Washington Enterprises on it. Someone else remembers that the event's headline sponsor had an ongoing negotiation with a major supplier. The math of influence is no longer abstract. It is concrete and dangerous. Kwame lifts his head and surveys the yacht, not like a wounded man but like a strategist reading a chessboard. He knows the power of a name and the fragility of reputations built on assumptions. He also knows that the spectacle they have made of him could collapse into his own life or into a larger, constructive action. He chooses to keep the scene steady. "Turn the music back on," he says quietly, to no one in particular, as if to restore the ordinariness of the night. "We can handle this calmly." His words act like a balm on the raw edges of the party. The DJ's fingers fumble the decks and the music comes back in a slow, awkward swell. It does not erase what has happened, It simply lets the human comedy resume its rhythm. Yet under the music's surface there is a new current. People are waiting now for what will come next. Will he be escorted off? Will Emma be disciplined? Will the yacht's contract values be invoked? Will the scandal melt into gossip? Or will it become something heavier? Derek calls the owner relations line again to triple-check the record. This time, the confirmation comes back crisply. Kwame Washington is listed as the owner of the event. The app shows an account, an entity that holds contracts with prestige yacht services and multiple vendors. It is a professional web that extends beyond a single party. The tablet still glints on the deck with its cracked face. Someone stoops to pick it up and hands it back to Derek, who holds it like an instrument that has witnessed the fall of a carefully constructed narrative. He looks at Emma with a new question in his eyes. What now? Her posture is deflated. The righteous heat leaving her face reveals the human beneath. Alarm, fear, and the dawning understanding that a deed done in front of a crowd has consequences far beyond the satisfaction of public approval. On every screen the chat pauses, then reorients. Comments that had been validation pivot toward uncertainty and, in some cases, repentance. Oh, this is messy. Did we jump too fast? Others are less reflective. Is this guy lying? The internet is itself a courtroom and a bar, and its verdicts swing like a pendulum. Emma's first instinct is to double down. Pride is a stubborn resource, and in the instant where humiliation meets potential accountability, some reach for defiance as a shield. She straightens her shoulders and tries to reconstruct the narrative of danger. Her voice grows louder. She tries to remind people of the mess, of the spilled drinks, of the disturbance. She calls for names to be taken, for security to remove him to preserve the sanctity of the event. But Derek, reading the ledger and sensing the financial knife edge beneath his own authority, moves differently. He says quietly, and with the sort of authority that is not performative, "Emma, step aside. We need to verify." The tone is not an exoneration of Kwame, nor a blanket condemnation of Emma. It is a call to do the administrative work that can prevent a small moment from becoming an institutional collapse. Emma's hesitation is not only about pride, it is about fear of what stepping aside exposes. The crowd watches, the cameras watch. For a moment the party, even with its champagne and orchids, feels like a stage set for something larger than any of them expected. Kwame looks at Emma with a compassion that is not sentimental. There is no triumphant glee in his gaze. He knows humiliation in a way that refuses recrimination as a habit. He also knows leverage and accountability are different things. He steps forward, puts a hand on Derek's shoulder and says, "Please check everything. I want transparency." Derek nods and begins the work of verification with a methodical, almost mechanical calm. He checks guest lists, contact logs, security footage. The earlier storm of accusation becomes a procedure, less cathartic, but more durable. Derek moves between phone calls and screens and begins to craft a path through the political landmines that memory has scattered across the deck. As Derek works, people in the crowd begin to shift their positions. Some move toward privacy, ashamed at the public performance they have allowed. Others stick to their phones, composing posts that will frame the evening. Victoria edits a clip still glowing with indignation, but adds a note of uncertainty at the headline. She tastes the moment. The story is richer if it can pivot from outrage to the twist of ownership. Emma stands near the railing, a small figure against the expanse of the river, and watches the party that she thought she controlled pivot into an unknown. The camera lights play along the lines of her face. She is on display in the most cruel sense. The woman who commanded a crowd now acknowledged as a person who misread a man. There is shame, yes, but there is also a flicker of potential. Will she learn, or will she double down? Will she be accountable, or will she be cast out? Kwame, for his part, remains composed. He does not issue a public rebuke. He recognizes that humiliating her in return would complete a cycle that degrades everyone. He understands the optics. Revenge would look like petty triumph. Instead, he chooses a quieter calculus. He knows the systems his corporation touches, the contracts and the employees and the livelihoods that flow through a simple his and hers of corporate influence. And he knows it would be easier to spectate than to leverage. He steps back into the crowd, moves over to where a group of staff are whispering about logistics, and asks a single, precise question. If I don't make this public, can we still change the policy so this never happens again? It is a question that reframes the whole exchange from a private injury to a public responsibility. The question hangs in the air like the maritime fog that sometimes rolls off the river. It nudges people away from spectacle and toward consequence. If the answers are earnest, they will look like policies, training, reports, and perhaps reparations of a kind. If they are evasive, they will look like rhetoric. Derek turns that small question into protocol. He hauls security into a quiet room and begins to make a list. Incident report, witnesses, damaged property, names, and an immediate plan for who to contact at the company's headquarters. The list is not punitive on its face. It is procedural. That is why procedure can be an instrument of justice, if wielded with intention. The cameras keep rolling. The stream has spiked into 5 figures that feel like a public collective breathing in the same moment. People are watching a private humiliation mutate into a possible institutional reckoning. The internet begins to feel like both jury and audience, anxious for direction and hungry for an ending that satisfies their appetite for moral order. Emma retreats for a moment to the back of the deck, near the orchids. Her hands tremble. Someone offers a glass of water, and she takes it like a benediction. For the first time since the altercation, she finds space to think. The initial righteous fervor that guided her actions is cooling into a heavier consideration. The consequences of being the symbol of a targeted act and not seeing the human beneath the symbol. Her face softens with an admission that will either become the seed of her repair or the root of her denial. Across the deck, Kwame watches the technical team. He has a quiet conversation with a young tech named Leo. He listens more than he speaks and asks a question that shows how he thinks. If your systems are open like that, who is accountable when an error cascades into a human cost? They talk about redundancy, protocols, and accountability in ways that sound more like corporate governance than party small talk. In that moment, the man people wanted humiliated is the one making careful, strategic inquiries about how to prevent future humiliations for others. The drink in Emma's hand sweats, and she looks at the small puddle at her feet. The wetness on the deck seems to mirror the wetness of her conscience. She stands at the edge of 2 choices: to break, to apologize, to learn, or to fortify, to reframe, to seek vindication through the same mechanisms that first made her right. The decision will not be instantaneous. Shame is a stubborn engine. Repairing it takes time. When Derek returns in a calmer rhythm, the ledger of ownership is now irrefutable on his device. He clears his throat and tells Emma gently but firmly that they need to step into a private space to sort the incident. The word private is an instruction, a small containment, a way to prevent the spectacle from metastasizing into irreversible harm. For some guests, it feels like an inconvenient interruption. For others, a mercy. Before they leave, Kwame addresses the cluster of friends and staff in a voice designed to be heard without spectacle. Please, make sure the staff is not punished, he says. They can lose more than you imagine because of a moment's mistake. It is not a plea for absolution. It is a recalibration of priorities. He understands that the real power is to protect those whose livelihoods hang on the choices of the privileged. Emma looks at him and something in her face shifts. There is a brief, raw flicker of recognition. That whatever power the night gives is fragile, and that humiliation administered in public has effects that reach far into the lives of people who never asked to be part of your performance. She nods, a small thing like a cracked bell being tuned. It is not a full acceptance. It is the first stirrings of one. The cameras lower by degrees. The crowd disperses in small clusters with the awkward self-consciousness of people who have seen something they'd rather have not authored. Keyboard warriors moderate their feeds. Victoria rewrites her post with less certainty. The live audience counts splutter. Some viewers tune out. Others hold on, waiting for what comes next. But underneath that settling, the river of consequence keeps moving. Derek makes calls to the corporate liaison and lets it be known that an ownership issue exists and that the company's name is attached to the event. Those calls ripple out. The name Washington travels faster than any correction could. It touches the ears of managers, legal teams, and perhaps in the shadowy halls of corporate governance, People who will have to decide whether to convert this moment of humiliation into a catalyst for change or let it dissipate into gossip. Quaim walks away from the scene and toward a quieter corner of the yacht where he can make another call. He is not running. He is choosing the instrument of his response. He understands that public spectacle is a blunt tool and that his leverage will be found at the intersection of moral purpose and institutional pressure. He types a message, places another call. Precise, private, deliberately low-key. Sometimes the most consequential acts happen without cameras present. As the yacht's systems cough back to life, lights warming, music returning to a softer hum, the scene dissolves into the familiar choreography. Derek's call ripples outward faster than the guests can rearrange their discomfort into small talk. He dials numbers that live in an inbox he has only ever used for logistical emergencies. At the other end of the line, a corporate liaison answers with a clipped patience until Derek supplies the ledger entry. Owner, Kwame Washington. Event tied to Washington Enterprises. Vendor contracts. A damaged tablet. The liaison goes quiet for a single professional heartbeat, then asks the question Derek already hears in his bones. What do you need us to do? Quaim, standing a short distance away with his shirt still damp along the collar, closes his phone and watches the exchange with a calm that is not indifference, but calculation. He knows how to convert a case of public humiliation into leverage for durable change. He understands the weight of a name on a ledger. He also understands the human cost of turning a single moment of error into wholesale ruin. His posture tonight is neither punitive nor performative. It is strategic. Find me the regional director, he says to Derek once the call ends. And legal. Quietly. Derek trains himself to follow orders, and his voice steadies. He relays the names, the contracts at play, an events pipeline that moves through 3 continents, and an approximate figure. Derek speaks with the awkward technicality of a man who measures risk in spreadsheets. Potential exposure, on the order of a few $100 million, and thousands of jobs tied to supplier commitments. He doesn't pin a legal outcome to those numbers. He states them as a fact that presses on choices. The yacht's back rooms become a small makeshift war room. Derek wheels in a folding table and plugs a laptop into the one working outlet still connected to the generator. The tech team, shaking off a spectacle that felt like part of their job and part of an accusation, spread spreadsheets and contracts like maps. Someone pins a vendor roster to the bulkhead. Another prints a list of staff with hourly wages and next payroll dates. The ledger of obligations is a neat, brutal arithmetic. Livelihoods, invoices pending, deposits that could be reversed if sponsors pull out. Back on the terrace, cameras keep rolling. Victoria edits her feed with surgical intent. She posts a new headline that leans toward the twist. Hostess humiliates man who may own the party. How far did we jump to judgment? The caption invites clicks, but the tone is tempered now. It tracks the pivot of an audience learning it might have been wrong. 2 hours later, the name Washington Enterprises is a trending search term across several platforms. Reporters reach out to the company's general counsel. A morning show producer calls a PR contact and asks, with thinly disguised glee, "So are you going to fire her?" That question tautens the air. It assumes the script everyone is waiting for. An execution of accountability in real time. Kwame does not like scripts that end in spectacle. He wants a different ending. He convenes a short list of people. Derek, the company's head of external affairs, Miriam Lynn, a legal counsel dialing in from a Manhattan office, and a consultant he knows by reputation for doing hard institutional work, Dr. Alicia Duarte, a diversity and systems change specialist whose practice focuses on combining corporate governance with community-based restorative measures. When the call connects, voices form around the same simple fact. The incident is now public, and Washington Enterprises is implicated through association. Miriam, crisp and professional, asks the practical questions first. What immediate action protects staff, vendors, and the company's relationships? Kwame answers without flourish. We must contain harm, repair what we can, and set conditions so this cannot happen again. Containment becomes a short list of immediate moves. Derek places Emma on administrative suspension, while the event's host prepares a written statement. The yacht's operator offers to cooperate fully, and to secure video and witness logs. Washington Enterprises requests copies of feeds and insists on a private review. Kwame, for his part, asks for two things that will shape the coming days: an audit of event protocols and a commitment from Prestige Yacht Services to engage in a meaningful plan of corrective action, not to kneecap a single employee but to redesign the systems that allowed an individual to humiliate another without checks. At first glance, the demands look corporate and rational: internal review, vendor training, disciplinary measures. But what sets Kwame's posture apart is the second layer of the request. He refuses to make this a private correction tucked away from public view. Instead, he wants an outcome that converts personal humiliation into public responsibility. He asks for a visible plan, a set of reforms tied to measurable commitments, and a restorative pathway for Emma grounded in training and accountability, not public shaming. By the next morning, Washington Enterprises communications team drafts a statement. It neither revels in vengeance nor excuses the wrongdoing. It reads in part, "We are committed to ensuring dignity for all who engage in our events, and are calling for an immediate review with Prestige Yacht Services to implement systemic changes that prevent similar incidents in the future." The language is corporate but exact in its intention: transparency, remediation, and prevention. David, a regional operations manager for Prestige, reads the statement and realizes the scope of the threat. Contracts that had seemed stable overnight now carry the click of a potential unspooling. A headline across an industry trade journal poses the blunt question: at what cost? When a single incident threatens sponsorship pipelines, who bears the fallout? The answer, in the terse language of procurement, is always someone. The negotiations that follow are the theater of consequence. Washington Enterprises, not by instinct for spectacle but by calculation of risk, attaches a clear set of demands to their willingness to continue existing partnerships. They request 3 immediate actions from Prestige Yacht Services: the termination of Emma Rodriguez from event duties pending a formal review, the implementation of unconscious bias and de-escalation training across staff with a timeline, and the activation of an independent oversight mechanism to ensure compliance. Derek listens, stomach nodding as the words call into question the choices of his managerial life. Prestige's senior leadership scrambles to balance legal exposure, client relationships, and their own commitments to staff. They cannot deny the arithmetic Kwame has put on the table. Failure to comply risks contract cancellations that, if executed across multiple clients, could threaten revenue streams that underpin the company. The spreadsheet laid out in their conference room shows line items: deposits lost, vendor penalties, staffing costs multiplied over time. The numbers are blunt, and the human consequences sit beside them: hundreds of crew who rely on this seasonal work. At a terse meeting, the CEO of Prestige signs a memorandum of immediate compliance. Emma is placed on unpaid leave pending a structured corrective program. An external audit firm is contracted to review guest access protocols, and Dr. Alicia Duarte is retained to design mandatory training and an anonymous reporting app, what will be called the Safe Harbor reporting platform, that staff and guests can use to flag incidents without fear of reprisal. Some stakeholders push back. A few board members of Prestige worry that firing a hostess over a single moment sets a precedent. "We need to be careful about creating a culture of instant dismissal based on viral outrage," one of them says, voice folded with fear. Kwame's response is neither a condemnation nor a cold legalism. It is a reframe. This is not about the viral moment. It's about whether your systems empower people to do harm without accountability. We are asking you to fix those systems. The tone Kwame chooses, firm, not theatrical, carries weight. It turns the conversation away from revenge and toward design. How does a company turn a moral failure into a concrete policy improvement? The question lands in a room filled with people who know how to measure risk and are now being asked to measure morality in the same ledger. Emma, when told she is suspended and under review, experiences the fall of a life built on small acts of public authority. The job had given her a map of how to be seen. She had learned to wield a glance, a clipped phrase, a demand for ID as if each were a token cementing her social capital. Now the tokens scatter like the wet business card on the river. In the days that follow, the story fractures into media fragments. Some outlets focus on the theatricality of it all, others on the broader implications. An op-ed titled, "When the Internet is the Judge," calls for a sober look at how quickly narratives harden without context. Another headline frames it as, "A Lesson in Corporate Responsibility," detailing the reforms Kwame requests and the potential economic stakes. The op-ed references industry data, figures circulating on professional forums, suggesting that the group of contracts tied to the event's pipeline could represent approximately $187 million in annualized business and support roughly 1,247 jobs across supply chains. Reporters use those numbers to give scale, not to predict legal outcomes. They describe the arithmetic as context for why a corporation would move decisively where a single hostess's error might otherwise remain a local embarrassment. Washington Enterprises does not threaten prestige with a public decimation. They propose a conditional partnership. They present a blueprint, immediate suspension pending review, mandatory training to be developed with Dr. Alicia Duarte's team, the launch of the Safe Harbor reporting app, and the establishment of a scholarship fund targeted at hospitality workers from underrepresented backgrounds, seeded by Washington Enterprises and administered by an independent foundation, to support career development and training. The company offers to underwrite a portion of the training costs and to publicize the program across its industry networks if Prestige agrees. The boardroom negotiations are intense but not theatrical. Derek's voice, usually reserved for logistics, surfaces with blunt poverty and urgent fear. "We can lose contracts overnight," he says. "People's lives are attached to these gigs." He is not pleading for the hostess. He is pointing out that a punitive response that fails to rebuild systems will harm those least able to weather loss. Kwame hears him. He hears the human arithmetic and folds it into his response. "Then the plan must include protections for staff. We will not trade one group's vulnerability for another's." The agreement that emerges is neither a clean victory nor a compromise of principle. It is a set of conditions. Emma exits the active roster of event managers and is enrolled in a restorative accountability program designed by Dr. Alicia Duarte's team. Prestige commits to the Safe Harbor reporting app within 90 days. Unconscious bias and de-escalation training roll out for frontline staff within 60 days. And Washington Enterprises offers to participate in a third-party audit of the industry's event protocols, sharing best practices publicly. The phrase restorative accountability is new to many involved. It is not merely punitive, it insists on repair and education. Under the terms agreed, Emma will undergo a process that includes facilitated dialogues with affected staff, if participants volunteer, mandated training modules on implicit bias, and a period of supervised community service in venues that serve more diverse communities. The program will be administered by an independent restorative practitioner, with outcomes focusing on learning and concrete reparations rather than private suffering. The choice to include rehabilitation is contentious among some observers. Some commentators demand strict punishment, others warn against making Emma a martyr. Dr. Alicia Duarte steps into that public conversation with a calm clarity. Restorative processes do not excuse harmful behavior. They require accountability, transparency, and reparations. They ask offenders to do substantive work to repair harm and to make commitments verified over time. Her work, she notes, is measurable. Attendance records, demonstrated competencies, community endorsements, and tracked changes in complaint metrics. Over the next 3 months, a flurry of implementation happens in accelerated, sometimes clumsy bursts. The Safe Harbor reporting app launches in beta with a robust privacy framework. It allows staff to document incidents, upload video or audio, and request anonymous mediation. Downloads tick upward, 5,000 in the first week, then 18,000 as other venues and vendors hear about it and adopt it. Washington Enterprises posts a short explainer on their site about why they funded the initial version: to create a low-friction channel for reporting and to push the entire industry toward better accountability. Prestige's training modules begin with uncomfortable frankness. Employees gather in a ballroom for a day of discussions led by Dr. Alicia Duarte and a rotating cast of subject matter experts, frontline workers, a psychologist who focuses on implicit bias, a union rep who speaks to worker protections, and a legal advisor who outlines rights and responsibilities in plain language. The sessions are practical, scenario-based role-plays for de-escalation, exercises to identify microaggressions, processes for documenting incidents that protect both complainants and staff from retaliation. Emma attends the training as part of her program. Her first public appearance after suspension is low-key. She sits at the back, hands folded, eyes often downcast. The cameras are not allowed. The sessions are not filmed. This is deliberate. The point is private work, not public theater. In group exercises, she is confronted by staff members who talk about the ripple effects of her actions, how a single public humiliation could cost them shifts, generate unsafe guest behavior, or expose them to reprisal. She listens. At times she responds with apology. At times she makes excuses. The process tests her patience and digs into the brittle armor of self-justification she'd used on the deck. Over weeks, something practical begins to change. Emma's restorative program requires that she take on supervised work at community centers offering hospitality training to at-risk youth. There she learns, with the bluntness of vocational instruction, how hospitality can be a ladder rather than a stage. She is tasked with teaching a module on guest relations, an assignment that turns her initial certainty into a curriculum. Students challenge her assumptions in ways she cannot easily dismiss. Through repeated exposure to lives outside her orbit, she begins to see the structural layers that shape people's presence in public spaces. Outside of Emma's arc, the industry responds in varied ways. Some companies enthusiastically adopt the Safe Harbor app in the training modules, eager to signal change. Others adopt only a veneer, running a single mandatory webinar, then returning to business as usual. Washington Enterprises, unsatisfied with superficial compliance, begins to require evidence of substantive change from its vendors. Audit reports, training completion rates, reduction in complaint metrics. Miriam Lin, watching implementation, begins compiling a public dashboard that tracks vendor compliance and staff protection metrics. The initiative is messy and uneven, but it is visible. The media narrates this as a test case. One timeline column in a trade journal reads like this: Incident, suspension, app launch, training rollout, audit. The column ends with a question mark. Will corporate pressure produce durable change or temporary PR fixes? The answer, as always with institutional reform, arrives in incremental statistics and human testimonies rather than instant transformation. Meanwhile, Emma completes the structured elements of her restorative program. She undergoes facilitated dialogues with staff. Some accept the invitation and speak candidly about the humiliation they felt simply being associated with a spectacle. The dialogues are not cathartic in a single meeting. They are papered with grief, frustration, and cautious hope. Emma accepts directive tasks, a public apology to the staff, crafted with guidance, a written reflection on her assumptions and the origins of her authority, and a commitment to ongoing learning. The program requires her to record a training segment once she demonstrates competency, a short video on how to de-escalate conflicts and how to respect guest dignity. Not everyone is quick to forgive. Public opinion is a swarm that does not live by the same logic as restorative programs. Some commentators continue to demand criminal consequences that no legal authority has pursued. Others argue she should never work in events again. The restorative program's defenders point to tangible measures: Emma's successful completion of training modules, testimonials from staff who reported feeling safer because of operational changes, and the fact that the Safe Harbor app registered a measurable decline in incidents recorded as severe by the third month. The economic threat hangs over these developments. It remains a lever that compels action without dictating outcomes. The $187 million figure circulates as shorthand for why a corporation would act, as leverage, not as a threat of personal ruin. Washington Enterprises uses its influence to push for industry-wide adoption of certain standards. It convenes a summit of event vendors, sponsors, and hospitality associations. The summit produces a voluntary code of conduct for events: incident reporting, staff training minimums, anonymous complaint channels, and vendor accountability measures. More than 200 vendors sign on in the first wave. Adoption is not universal, but the conversation has moved from one-off apology to systemic standards. Months later, the transformative arc reaches a public moment neither vengeful nor quietly bureaucratic: the Redemption Gala. The very venue that once hosted the scandal now hosts an industry summit on dignity and inclusion. The guest list is intentionally diverse: line workers, event managers, corporate buyers, representatives from community organizations, and graduates of the scholarship program Washington Enterprises seeded for hospitality workers from underrepresented communities. The marble and crystal of the old spectacle reappear, but the decor is reimagined with an intentional modesty, no ostentation meant to silence complexity. The gala is not a triumphal validation of one man and the fall of another. It is staged as a convening, a place to acknowledge harm, showcase progress, and commit to further work. Emma attends as a different person than the one who splashed water months earlier. She walks into the room with a kind of humility that is neither theatrical nor defeated. She has spent months in training and service, and she has completed the restorative requirements. She is not fully absolved in anyone's eyes, but she is present as someone who has undertaken work in remorse and reparation. Kwame stands at the podium near the end of the evening. The room quiets, not because of the chandeliers or the cameras, but because the program has earned a seriousness through its process. He speaks in a voice that had once been calm amid chaos, and that calm now carries the accumulation of months of work behind it. He does not rehash the water or indict Emma. Instead, he reframes the entire episode. What happened here that night was a small event with large consequences, he begins. It was not, in the end, about a water glass or a wet shirt. It was about the ways we have built systems where a single accusation can become the currency of public validation, where assumptions about who belongs are compressed into a single gesture, and where people's livelihoods can be endangered by spectacle. He names the structural elements plainly: social media's pulse, the bystander effect, the absence of reporting mechanisms that protect staff and guests alike, and the economic logics that make companies sometimes choose short-term calm over long-term justice. The voice in the room hears more than what is said. They hear the moral logic of someone who has chosen an active stewardship of power. Kwame continues, and the speech is careful, specific, and calls for action. He outlines the programmatic commitments Washington Enterprises has made and is now inviting the industry to adopt. The Safe Harbor app, an independent auditing mechanism, a fund for hospitality training scholarships, and during the next fiscal year, a procurement preference for vendors who demonstrate measurable commitments to worker safety and inclusion. He does not frame these as punitive measures but as investments. Dignity is not a cost center, he says. It is an infrastructure. We can build it and it will pay returns in human terms: retention, trust, and the kind of workforce we want to engage with. When he speaks of Emma, he does so without spectacle. She made a mistake, he says. But we chose a path that includes accountability, not annihilation. We are all accountable. The question is, will we build systems that keep us from repeating this error? The room responds in a way that feels private and public at once, a long, uncomfortable generosity. For many guests, it is the first time they have seen someone with power use, that influence not for revenge, but for systemic action. For Emma, the speech is not a pardon. It is an invitation to participate in something that will require ongoing proof of change. As the gala unfolds, small rituals mark the turn from spectacle to program. Washington Enterprises announces a public dashboard that will track vendor compliance with agreed standards. Dr. Alicia Duarte unveils the first set of training curricula, with measurable learning outcomes and verification mechanics. The Safe Harbor app reports 56,000 cumulative downloads and 4,300 confidential reports logged since launch. Statistics used not to gloat, but to argue that systems can surface patterns that go unreported in the blur of guests and thumbnails. There are critics who dismiss the gala as a PR recovery. Skeptics sniff that corporations change only when it aligns with profit. Those questions are reasonable. Real reform, the reformers argue, has to survive beyond headlines. The months that follow are where the test lives. In the aftermath, Washington Enterprises publishes an open-source version of the training curriculum and invites other large buyers to incorporate vendor compliance as a criterion in procurement decisions. The Safe Harbor app is offered free to community centers that train hospitality workers. The scholarship fund awards its first cohort of 10 hospitality students with tuition for a professional training program and a paid internship with partner vendors. Prestige Yacht Services, under the terms agreed, submits to an external audit and begins to publicize improvements. Staff retention rates stabilize, complaints decline by a measurable margin, and managers report a stronger morale among teams who no longer fear being scapegoated by spectacle. Emma's path continues to be uneven. She applies for a role designing customer service curricula at a technical school and is not immediately hired. The market is skeptical. But the restorative program's reports, completed modules, supervised fieldwork hours, positive testimonials from those who worked with her in community training, open a door. She is later offered a coordinator role within a nonprofit that runs hospitality certifications for marginalized youth, a position that puts her in a place of accountability and service rather than ephemeral authority. The role is modest, the salary smaller than what she once expected. But the work is substantive, and it requires humility and constant learning. Over the next year, industry metrics begin to show slow shifts. Vendors adopting the open-sourced curriculum, a 12% increase in reporting of incidents, which initially reads bad until analysts point out that reporting is the mechanism of accountability, and a gradual change in event protocols. The Safe Harbor dashboard posts quarterly updates, 84,000 downloads, 15,000 cases logged, 42 vendor partners. Washington Enterprises invites press to a small briefing where Miriam Lin presents a mid-year report. "This is not the end," she says, "but it is a better beginning." The narrative arc, from humiliation to program, does not resolve neatly. Emma's public image never fully recovers in popular chatter. The internet does not forget. Some comments from the live stream thread the night of the incident continue to resurface as snide reminders, but other threads appear too. Testimonials from workers whose jobs were preserved because a client insisted on vendor standards. A young hospitality student who credits a scholarship with opening a career path. Anecdotal reports from guests who note more thoughtful interactions at events. Quame's leadership becomes a case study in certain business schools as an example of transformational stewardship, how an executive used private leverage to push for public reform. He does not seek accolades. He continues to press vendors and clients to make structural changes, and he holds his own company to public accountability measures, publishing compliance reports, and inviting third-party assessment. At the center of his approach is a conviction that dignity can be enforced by design, by making systems that protect people rather than rely on the unpredictable moral courage of isolated individuals. He also understands the limits of what one company can do. The language he uses is sober. "We are a purchaser. We can set standards where we spend our money. We cannot make the world change overnight, but we can set an example and invite others to join." The public conversation evolves. Where earlier weeks were dominated by 5-minute outrage and the mechanics of virality, months later the dialogue digs into governance, procurement standards, transparency in vendor selection, and the responsibilities of event hosts to provide avenues for grievance redress. Policy papers in the trade press consider the ethics of live stream justice and recommend industry-wide codes. In a quiet epilogue that receives less coverage than the gala, Emma is recorded teaching a cohort at the nonprofit. No cameras allowed for viewership, but the nonprofit posts an edited interview about second chances that frames her growth as practical labor rather than redemption spectacle. "I never considered how much power I had," she tells the interviewer. "I thought I was keeping people safe. I learned how poor that understanding was. Now I teach people how to protect guests and staff without humiliating anyone. That work matters." For Kwame, the measure of success is not a single headline, but the slow accretion of safer spaces, improved complaint mechanisms, and a generation of managers who carry training records in their pockets. He keeps the ledger of outcomes behind him: scholarship recipients who found jobs, a decrease in severe complaints at partner venues, and a growing coalition of corporate buyers who require compliance as part of procurement. They are small shifts by scale, but large in the lives they touch. At the end, the final image returns to something quieter than the original spectacle. A simple clip of Kwame, months after the gala, visiting a hospitality classroom where the scholarship recipients learn practical skills. He kneels to talk to a student balancing a tray, listening to the ordinary concerns of someone learning a trade. No cameras capture the intimacy. It is an act of solidarity, not a soundbite. The last lines of the public address Kwame gave at the Redemption Gala remain with many viewers. He had said, "Power without responsibility is a hazard. Humiliation is easy. Repair is hard. If you have influence, use it to build the things that outlast the spectacle, systems that protect the vulnerable, training that teaches us to see one another, and paths to restitution that are durable and just. That keeps the final moral clean." Dignity paired with leverage can reshape industries when leaders choose policy over revenge. The story does not promise perfect justice or universal transformation. It promises something more practical, a model for converting a moment of public shaming into structural change, and an insistence that accountability need not turn a person into a permanent public spectacle. If this story landed with you, if it stirred a question or reminded you of a moment where assumptions hardened into harm, share it. Tell someone you trust, comment with your experience, or support organizations working to make public spaces safer. Change begins when we hold systems accountable, not just moments of outrage.